Hello, today we're going to talk about some advanced layout options in the Kuali Form Designer. This is the second video in a series demonstrating the various features available in the Kuali Form Designer. So here we have a starter form. This is a somewhat simpler version of the form that we looked at in our last video. And if we go down to edit, we can see we have a short instruction gadget at the top and then a few fields here. First, we're asking for a description of the details of our project and then the start date and how long the project will last. The first thing that I want to demonstrate is how to reorganize gadgets in the Form Designer. You might build out your form, get some review, and then find out, oh, we just want these things in slightly different order. And so we'll say, based on feedback from the form, we actually don't want to ask about the project description until after we know the duration of the project. So we can come here to this little icon that is 6 little dots on the side, and then we can just drag our gadget down. So now, if we go back to edit, we can see we're asking about the start date and how long the project will last, and then the please describe your project in detail is in the end of this particular section, which is great. The next thing that I want to demonstrate is how to use the size feature of the gadgets. So the start date and the duration, they make sense together, and some feedback that we got from early testing indicates that those gadgets should be next to each other. They don't need to take up the full width of the screen. So we're going to go in first to start date, and I'm going to scroll down, and I have this width option. And right now, the default, if nothing is in a particular gadget, it's treated as large. Extra large and large right now pretty much work the same way. But if we move it to medium, then 2 medium gadgets can appear next to each other on the screen. And if I select small, 3 small gadgets can appear next to each other on the screen. So I'm going to select medium for our start date and hit save. And then we're going to go over and look at edit. And you'll notice nothing has changed. And that might be confusing at first, but it's because how long will your project last is still a large gadget. And so there isn't actually room for it to appear next to list the start date for your project because you would need 2 medium gadgets. So now we will go back to config and we'll go to duration. If we scroll down on duration, we can choose medium, hit save, and then if we go back to edit, now these appear next to each other. They make sense next to each other, and you can see the form is just a little bit more tight. We don't have as much empty white space, and we're able to put together a more coherent form this way that doesn't require the user to scroll as much. And so as you're designing your form, looking for opportunities where fields won't have a very long answer and they make sense next to each other can let you build out a more comprehensive form. Now, the thing to be aware of is that as the user narrows the screen, if they were to say, just make their browser window very small, or they were to view this on a mobile device, the system will automatically adjust and move the fields down. If you are at the size of a mobile phone, all of the gadgets will be treated as large. They will never be next to each other. Or I should say more accurately, they'll all sort of be treated as small, and there's only room for 1 small gadget on a mobile display. And so this will adapt very nicely to moving over to mobile displays or people who have their resolutions perhaps very low because of eyesight issues. So it is designed to accommodate that. So the next thing that I want to do is show you how to set up a subsection. We have our project details section, but we might want to have a subsection within that, perhaps have headings that break up a very large section. So I'm going to click in here and I'm going to add a gadget to my project details section, and I'm going to make it another section. And we're going to call the section label unit details. Now for now I'm just going to save, and we're going to add a couple gadgets here so you can see what it looks like if we just do a regular section within a section. So I'm going to add a radio buttons question that asks funding for our header. And then for the field label long, we'll put is your unit funding your project. And next we want to scroll down, and I'm going to add yes and no as the options for this question. And we're going to save. I'm going to do a follow-up text input, put fiscal officer. Who is the fiscal officer for your unit? And I'm going to set up a little bit of progressive display. Now, full details on progressive display will be coming in a later video, but this setup is to show some of the layout and progressive display interaction, so I do want to demonstrate that here. So we're going to go to progressive display for this follow-up fiscal officer question, and it only displays if we say yes, we are getting funding from our unit. So I'm going to save that, and I'm going to add another radio buttons question, and this radio buttons question is going to be labeled hospitality, question mark. Again, we don't want to display that on the form. We can come here and say, does your project include hospitality expenses? And we want to come down and add our two options again. And then I'm going to add a follow-up question there, vendor ID. What is the approved vendor you are using for hospitality services? And I had a couple quick typos there, so we will correct that. Hospitality services. And we want to set this up with progressive display as well. Hospitality is yes. And then I'm going to hit save. So now we're going to go over to edit and see what this looks like. So you can see we have this subsection within the overall section, but it's indented. And so you can imagine, especially on a mobile display, if you wanted to get into a couple different levels of subsection, you'd start to get into a situation where you ran out of space and you were using a lot of screen real estate on the sides, which you might not have a lot of on a phone. And we can come here and we can interact with everything. We left the fiscal officer label there, so we'll want to clean that up. But we want something that makes better use of the screen real estate. So we're going to go back to config. First, I'm going to go in and turn off the label for fiscal officer. And I'm going to go into section. And in section, we want unit details to display. This is a subsection. We're organizing the form, but we don't want it to take up that space. We don't want it to be indented. So we're going to go to the bottom and we're going to turn off show wrapper. So now I'm going to hit save. And when we go back to edit, now we have our header, but we're not showing the wrapper anymore. We're not showing the rest of that frame. And so the gadgets that are inside this section are at the same alignment, the same indentation as the other gadgets in the section, but we have this nice header here. And it has a consistent look with the header of the section overall. And so this is a good way to break up your form. The system also uses sections to define H tags, heading tags in the page code, and those tags are often used by screen readers for the purposes of accessibility for individuals who might have visual impairment and need to use the screen reader to navigate your form. So being certain to use the sections in this manner when you need to set up these subsections will also assure that you have a solid H tag hierarchy in place to facilitate accessible use of your form. So the next thing that I want to show, we have some progressive display here. And when we look at these questions, there's a lot of white space over here on the side. And so these don't need to be very long. It's just you looking for the name of a fiscal officer and a vendor code. And so we want to set these up to be side by side. It's going to be a little bit more complicated in this case than it was before with the dates because of the progressive display. I want to show what some of the complication is there and how you can solve it using the tools in the system. So we're going to go back to config, and I'm going to change all 4 of these gadgets to medium so that they'll appear side by side. So now we have all of these gadgets set to medium, so they should appear side by side, 2 to a row, which is great. So let's go back to edit. And these look fantastic. They look awesome. Is your unit funding your project? Who's the fiscal officer for your unit? They make sense next to each other. But if I click no, the system jumps around because it's displaying 2 gadgets. Is your unit funding your project? The next display gadget is, does your project include hospitality expenses? But these are both medium gadgets. So the system puts them side by side. If we had more follow-up medium gadgets after this, then it would also be an issue with what is the approved vendor you are using for hospitality services, and the does your project include hospitality expenses. So this isn't really desirable behavior. We'd like the yes/no questions to always appear on the left side, and for their follow-up questions to appear in the white space next to them, if appropriate. We can set this up in the system. So I'm going to go back to config, and I'm going to create a couple subsections. So we're going to create a section, and we're going to call it funding, and I'm not going to display the label. I'm going to scroll down, and I'm not going to display the wrapper. We're going to hit save, and then I'm going to drag the section to the top here. And we are going to put funding in here, and we are going to put fiscal officer after funding. Then I'm going to create a second invisible section, and we will call it hospitality. We don't want to show the header, and we do not want to show the wrapper. So I'm going to hit save, and then we're going to pull our hospitality gadget down into this invisible section, and we're going to pull vendor ID down into this invisible section. And initially, if you hadn't seen the gadgets jumping around, it might be weird. Why would you want invisible sections? What purpose do they serve? But now, if we go back to edit, we can see that we have the behavior that we're looking for, where the gadgets aren't jumping around. And the reason for that is that section is large. That section will always take up the full width of the screen. And since the section will always take up the full width of the screen, this medium gadget can't slide back in next to this gadget. So invisible sections are a good way to anchor your layout when progressive disclosure might result in the gadgets moving around based only on their sizing. So this can be a very useful tool to control the visuals in the behavior of your particular form. I hope this has been useful. These are some of the more advanced layout tools. They can obviously be used in much more complicated scenarios than this, especially if you start getting into small gadgets and more questions side by side. And it's always important to go back and test the behavior when you're using these more advanced features and to test how the form will scale down to a mobile size. But really, these tools should let you build out a very comprehensive, usable form that looks very good and provides a delightful experience for your users. I hope you'll come back and join us next time when we go into more detail on progressive disclosure.